So the ceasefire between the United States and Iran continues, at least for now. The U.S. has set up a blockade of Iranian ports as we roll out a program of economic warfare designed to force the Iranian regime to the negotiating table. And now we wait to see if that'll work or if military strikes are back on the table. So to help break down where things stand today, we're joined by Rear Admiral retired Mark Montgomery. Admiral Montgomery served more than 3 decades in the U.S. Navy, was policy director for the Senate Armed Services Committee under Senator John McCain, and is now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We get into where he thinks the war is headed in the short term, what signs will tell us that the Iranian regime is actually hurting due to this blockade, and more. You can follow Admiral Montgomery at the links in the description below, and with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Admiral Montgomery, sir, thank you so much for taking the time. There's a lot happening. I didn't realize how much you were doing in Ukraine, so you're kind of bouncing all over the place right now. But if we could today maybe focus on Iran.
That sounds like a good idea. It's definitely in the news.
All right, so we are recording this the morning of April 28th, to put a little timestamp on this. And if you wouldn't mind, just give us an overview of where things stand today.
Look, in my opinion, where we're at right now is the United States did conduct a aggressive air campaign against the critical, the defense critical infrastructure of Iran, its weapons systems, its maritime missile defense, drone, air defense, weapon systems, and to varying degrees they were successful on that. I get concerned when they say we 60% degraded, 70% degraded. Sometimes you don't know what the denominator is on that. And you could still have a lot of things, but I think overall, given what the operational objectives of the air campaign were, was pretty good. The problem, of course, is it didn't feed a strategic objective, such as regime change or some kind of significant change in how the regime was acting. So that's occurred. We're now in part of this was, people are like, Iran discovered it controls flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's known this for 40 years on and off. What Iran discovered was that with the weapon systems that have evolved, the insurers and owners of merchant ships are much less likely to want to convoy across with the U.S. Navy when offered. Like when I did convoy operations back in the 90s, or other people did in the 1980s, there was a much, it was like, hey, we're doing a convoy, we're in, right? The ships were in and we left. Now, because of something called the Joint War Council in London, which is like the insurers, like Illuminati, that kind of makes a decision on, is this safe, is this not safe? There's a lot of reticence for the 200 plus ships in the Arabian Gulf to convoy out. So recognizing that Iran has the ability to stop the merchant ships from going through the Gulf, that's effectively a blockade, and then allowed their own ships that had stopped in Iranian ports through, and maybe a few other ships that were friendly in nature. The United States put up what I would call a counter blockade. They call it a blockade, but it was really a countering the Iranian blockade. And it's been very effective. We are conducting economic warfare against Iran right now. So when you ask how are things going, I think we're 2 weeks into what's probably going to have to be a 6 or 8 week economic warfare campaign. An economic warfare campaign where we prevent Iran from shipping $15 billion worth of fossil fuel a month, or $300 billion a year, or probably at this point 80 or 90% of their possible exports, maybe 90 to 95% even of their possible exports, are now being blocked. I think their traditional economy was heavily damaged by the bombing campaign I mentioned earlier, because their defense critical infrastructure and their critical infrastructure had a lot of ligature. So their economy is coming to a complete standstill. Complicating this, they're pumping oil right now, and they're putting it in large stowage facilities. Those stowage facilities are starting to rapidly fill up. They filled up every empty tanker they could find. And now they've filled up their empty stowage facilities. And now pretty soon they're going to have to stop pumping. And in the weird world of fracking and oil extraction, it turns out it's not a guarantee. When you have it's a good one, it's a ripper from Landman, that you were watching the TV show.
Yeah.
When you come back after you've ceased pumping and try to restart, that re-injection that restart may not go well. You may not end up at the same flow rates. In fact, it's a known that you're not likely to show up at all these places at known flow rate, at your maximum flow rates, for a lot of different reasons, geological reasons. So Iran's they're confronting a actual loss of cash that's about to be compounded by a potential loss of long-term equity, access and resources. So this is a big deal. They may press right through it. The IRGC may say, not affecting my Cayman Islands accounts or my Swiss accounts. I'm doing okay. Keep going. But I think it's more likely that the political leadership explains to the political leadership, which is the weaker of the parties, explains to the security leadership, hey, our economy is going to cease functioning in 1, 2, 3 weeks, whatever it is. So big moments coming. One of the things I'll mention that kind of makes it nice is the U.S. is going around the U.S. Navy and grabbing up ships that came through the straits before we'd set up the counter blockade. There's a handful of those ships. I think we just pulled one over in the Straits of Malacca. And these are ships, with up to 2 million barrels of fuel, so up to $200 million worth of future income for the Iranian regime being pulled up by us. These hurt. And I think we're up to 3 or 4 of those ships now. And we should try to grab every one of them that's still on the high seas.
So it seems like we're in a bit of a different phase of the war. There's very clearly the kinetic. We're going after any number of targets from the Air Force to the Navy, mobile missile launchers, production facilities. I think it moved into that at one point. The strikes have stopped. The ceasefire has essentially held. I mean, there's some little, some Iranian fire on some commercial vessels, but between the United States and Iran, it seems like it's actually held. And we've moved into this economic focus. It sounds like every other day we're on the verge of going back to fighting. Do you expect that there will be kinetic action alongside this economic focus, or are we probably going to wait to see this thing play out over the next, I think you said 6 to 8 weeks?
So I think that if the Iranians put a ship out that tries to lay mines, we will sink it. Because the president said to do that, and General Kane and Admiral Cooper are highly effective at executing the president's orders. So that I'll caveat that and then say, I think this thing holds through May 14th, 15th, the meeting between Xi and Trump. I think Trump's got this in a position in his mind where, look, it's not really impacting China because China has tons of oil reserves. And their electrical power grid is not oil LNG dependent. They have a lot of coal, a lot of nuclear power, a lot of renewables on there powering that. So China's okay. And the United States is okay. We're a net neutral kind of import, fossil fuels import export. Now, economies we deal with are about to have similar problems, and economies China deals with are about to have similar problems. So we're both going to have problems, but they're not problems that evidence themselves before May 14th, 15th. So the president wants to get this meeting in. I think shifting to combat operations before that meeting would cancel the meeting.
Okay.
So my gut reaction is that he could not shift to combat operations and shift out before the May 14th, 15th meeting in a way that allows it to happen. So in my mind, I think we're now on this, and I like this because the most, as a military guy, the best plan here is to use economic warfare for a while. Let it play out. Look, economic warfare takes 2 things, patience and discipline. These are not things in large supply among any American president, but particularly the current American president. So by having this unnatural forcing feature of the meeting with Xi, the summit, push this to like the 3rd week of May makes me happy because 3 weeks from now, the United States will still be like, is there really pain from this? And Iran's going to be like, oh, there's pain, right? And now, look, other countries, the Saudis, UAE, but I think most of them have resigned themselves. And the Saudis and UAE are pumping through other pipelines that go across to the Red Sea or to Oman. But they're certainly losing, profit. They're losing exports. And the smaller countries, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, are losing. But I think this is one of those things where their great adversary, Iran, is in this showdown with the United States, and they can probably gut this out. And if they can gut it out, then Trump sticks to his guns, we'll have to see where Iran sits 3 weeks from now. I'll bet they're in the hurt locker.
What would be an indication to you that they're in the hurt locker? Because we're in this weird time where Argacci and Halabaif, they're going on Twitter and they're ranting day and night, and most of their focus tends to be just disputing whatever Trump says. But we're getting very confident statements in the public from the IRGC. So what would you look to say, these things are starting to make an impact?
Well, I would have said if they try to split the Straits of Hormuz and nuclear issues into two, because they can't wait for the nuclear one to get resolved. And that's what they did 2 days ago. So to me, that's a sign like, hey, man, let's solve this Straits of Hormuz issue. Let's get this economic warfare campaign over with and just revert back to the nuclear issue. I don't think we're going to take them up on that initially. Now, look, if they gave us an unbelievable answer on the Straits, like we renounce our ability to shut it down, things that I don't think they're going to say. Their description of this is going to be, we allow the Straits to be open and you allow the Straits to be open. The Straits are open. At midnight this time, we both allow it to be open to full trade and we see what happens for 24 hours. And by the way, there won't be a lot of movement. The only movement initially will be Iranian ships, because if you're like Maersk, whatever, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to wait a little bit on that one.
Let's see what this looks like next week. Yeah.
Let's push a fertilizer ship through first, right? So we'll see what happens. That's one way. Now, look, I don't know that we'll accept that, because our big beef has always been the nuclear program. And if we remove the pressure point, which is the Straits of Hormuz, all we leave ourselves with is the threat of offensive strikes, to move the strait. Now, maybe that's what we do, is we say, look, we're going to do this. And by the way, we're going to strike your your nuclear program if you slow roll us on negotiations. And we don't expect the Straits of Hormuz issue to change. Like, if you really want to separate these, we'll separate them and stand by. We will pound the other issue if we have to. And again, I don't think that's something the Iranians accept very easily. I think you'll be right back into a Straits of Hormuz shutdown if you start to bomb the nuclear program. But we'll see. None of these are good solutions. You're asking me what I think will happen. Is I think the economic warfare campaign continues till after the Trump summit, and then we see how we negotiate our way out of it.
The Iranian regime has long had a strategy of delaying, and it's the next round of talks, and it's the next, we'll get back together in May and then April and then June. And it seems like we started to see a little bit of that during this ceasefire, where there was this kind of, we're putting our points together. And now looking back, it feels a little bit like it's getting drug along. How do you interpret that here?
I think initially they may not have accepted or onboarded how effective our blockade would be. And therefore they didn't accept or onboard the economic pain they were going to feel. Now that they can feel it, and now that they know it's going to get worse, they're desperately trying to separate these issues and get the nuclear one on, because they can't afford the Straits of Hormuz one to last. As you properly said, the nuclear one by definition is going to last 6, 12, 18 months or longer, right? So they're trying their hardest to get some separation between those issues so they can get their economy going. So I don't think they can play that delaying game with the Straits. They've got with the economic blockade in place. That's why they cannot play the delaying game on nuclear power if we are at the same time are holding to our blockade, because they may not feel it as fast as we would like. They may be more resilient than we think, but if they get no money in for 2, 3, 4 months, that's going to be a problem. This was the IRGC, for all its ideological fervor, is still a pretty greased organization, which is to say there's payments made, and those payments aren't going to be happening if there's no cash. They brutally murdered 32,000 people in like 36 hours just 2 months ago. That was because they were sending a signal to 300 or 400,000 other people who they feared rising up. So those people are still there. At some point, they stop being mad at America over its bombing and start being mad at the IRGC again, as they were before. And then they're going to have another problem on their hands. So from my point of view, time's on our side if our president is patient and disciplined.
Hindsight being 2020, it seems like this maybe would have been a good process to kick off with the bombing campaign if we're talking about how long it's going to take for the economic impact to play out. Do you know why maybe we didn't start this sooner?
Listen, I think the president had an idea he was going to conduct an air campaign against Iran. Sometime in 2025, even after the quote obliteration of Midnight Hammer of the nuclear program, he knew the real deal, which was it was not obliterated, and he probably knew he was going to have to do a campaign. I think he also thought regime change is a good thing. Then the 32,000 people get killed, and he says something wrong, which is stand by, we're coming, because that's when CENTCOM told him, well, we're coming is in 2 to 3 months after, or 1 to 2 months after we pull enough ships, aircraft, and air defense units. I mean, the weird thing is I'm starting to see the military as 3 sets of organizations that really are like the swing force for Asia, even a little bit Europe, but definitely Asia and the Middle East. And that's Air Force fighter squadrons, Navy ships and carriers, and sometimes subs, and Army air defenders. Those are these 3 things that are the most things. And by the way, the Air Force loves its fighter pilots, the Navy loves its ships, and the Army doesn't give a shit about air defenders. So there's a problem inherent in what I just said. And by the way, which one of those 3 failed us? In that thing, the Army air defenders, because they have not been properly, the people didn't. The people who've been buying stuff for the Army air defense for the last 20 years were abysmal. There's a system called IFPC, that's our short range and cruise missile defense system. We could have really used it. I call it the Phoenix Suns of missile defense. It's always 2 years away from being 2 years away. In 2016, they told me, Bonnie, it's 2 years away. Well, it's 2026, and it's 2 years away.
2 years away.
I mean, this is crazy. And you know what? Everyone involved has been promoted from colonel to 1-star to 2-star to 3-star. Because, I'm not going to get into my whole...
They didn't fail. It's still coming. Yeah.
That's right. It's still coming. Yeah, exactly. They didn't fail. I wouldn't call IBCS a resounding procurement success. Whether or not IBCS has the integrated battle management system that's going to hook all the... By the way, not being used because it gets in the... Right now, it's still not a functional system in my mind. It's coming online. But it's another one that, promised in 2013 was the START project. I mean, it started earlier than that, but I think thought we'd start to see elements of 2013. It's 2026. I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but the Army needs to, and by the way, finally, I will get down a little bit. I go to Ukraine a little bit. A lot of us were seeing these Ukraine counter-drone interceptors a year ago. I saw 8 or 10 of these systems. These dudes are like 0.6 to 0.8 PK on a Shahed. Launched 2 of them, got a 90% chance of shooting down a Shahed. 2 of them, so that was a massive expenditure, like $3,000. Launched 3 of them, it's probably almost 100%. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we come to, I'm telling Army people, the Ukrainians come over, lots of us are who are going back and forth. Not a lot of Army, because remember, U.S. policy, there's 2 places in the world we will not send our active duty admirals or generals. Ukraine, the war that's going on, and Taiwan, the war that's about to happen. That's another stupid plan of the United States, because we fear provoking Russia and China.
Just by being there for lessons learned and okay.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, you want your generals to do it, because if your generals visit Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and skip Taiwan, when they get back to the headquarters, they're like, "What does the Philippines need again? What's Japan need? South Korea? I don't know about that Taiwan." You know what I mean? Because you didn't see it. It's crazy. Look, we're not that simplistic, but we're pretty close. All right, but back on this, Army air defenders were offered. I mean, the president was offered by Zelensky the Ukrainian drone systems, counter drone systems, last year, and he turned them down. He said, "I don't need that stuff from him. We don't need Ukraine stuff." Yes, we did. We did poorly. When this is forensics of the air defense of Arab countries and U.S. forces in Arab countries in this 40-day war, we are not going to be impressed.
I'm a little optimistic that it's the kick in the pants we needed, and we got that kick at a we certainly we lost. I think the number is 14 at this point. Tragic, every one of them. There was the drone or missile strike that impacted in Kuwait, the command center, right? And 0 is the correct number we're looking for. But I'm optimistic.
And Prince Sultan Air Base, right? They hit an AWACS. By the way, just had fighter jets fly over. I'm pretty sure that's for the king and the president, and not because I'm saying bad things about Army Air Defense. Prince Sultan Air Base, an AWACS plane was hit, and other aircraft on the apron. Radars, Patriot THAAD radar systems, ours and our partners hit. This is not okay. This is not effective air defense. I know I'm way off the topic here, but I'm worried. We need to get that stuff straightened out before we restart kinetic operations. I truly hope. I know the Ukrainians have given stuff to our air partners. I know that the UAE has Iron Dome from Israel with Israeli soldiers. I'm hoping the U.S. has lost its arrogance and has Ukrainian counter-drone systems operating on our bases. And we've learned to, just eat it and do the right thing. It's certainly been offered by Zelensky over the last month and a half.
So that's actually an area I'd like to stick with real quick. The conflict has gotten, I think, very partisan, whether it's the criticism of, we were just talking about the shortcomings in air defense. How do you balance that? Career military, we need to be able to take these lessons away. Where's the line? And how do you find the line between this is what went wrong versus just support for the troops, for lack of a better term?
Well, the good news is almost all these errors are bipartisan in nature. I've seldom found, on these, particularly on procurement, like the air defender issue, this goes back to like 2013. So you're through 4 administrations, 2 presidents from 2 parties. My criticism is bipartisan in nature. Now, if you start criticizing the president's decision making, you got to. I think you have to be, even as a retired military officer, you can criticize. Like I criticize the double tap, the second strike on survivors, shipwreck survivors, clinging to a boat.
Caribbean, yeah.
But that's because you read the law of war manual and it says like, don't do this, and then it says, hey, JAGs, if you ever try to write an illegal law, here's one I wouldn't write: attack survivors in the water. It's literally the example of a bad JAG, ruling, right? So that's something like that. Hey, that is a decision that you can criticize. You can say that was right or wrong. What you shouldn't do is in the middle of in the middle of an operational campaign on a line of effort of destroying the ballistic missiles, and they say we're at 63%. You're like, no, I think we're more like 50. You should be careful with that. They're trying to in situ be an admiral or a general again. You should let that go. What you could do is assess things after they happen. And so I think, and I don't see a lot of, first of all, I don't see too many retired admirals and generals talking these days. And I think it's because almost all of them they're on boards of, companies, investment companies, defense industrial base, or they work at them. And fully understand, look, those companies are like, look, we don't want you passing judgment on anything in public. Now, some of them are so senior, they could probably write in a clause that says I can still go. I see General Petraeus on all the time. So my guess is he's senior and famous enough that he can say, yeah, I note your concern. I trust my judgment better. And he does a great job. You see Jack Keane on a lot, an Army general. You see a handful of Navy admirals like Fozzie Miller, who's a former Fifth Fleet, and Kid Donegan, Admiral Donegan, who's former Fifth Fleet. So those are the right guys to kind of explain to people how a blockade works in the Middle East. A guy like me coming on to talk about how a blockade works, or as a SWO, surface warfare officer, what's it like to be in a blockade? Or in a convoy, things like that. So I think that part's okay. I think kind of in situ, trying to relitigate whether or not you should be the operational commander at this moment, by giving your advice, that's a mistake. And I don't think I see too many people doing that. And I don't see any doing it really.
I would agree. It definitely, from what I've seen, it's more civilian commentators. So not, which I think is fine, is good. That's what we want. We want the population. Exactly. But I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. I have not seen very many retired, especially flag officers, coming out with strong takes one way or the other. They're doing a lot more explaining. Here's what you're seeing and why.
Here's the other thing. I will say, I am comfortable, and I have commented on the firing of admirals and generals by the Secretary of Defense, because I think we're not doing it. Look, I'm not saying they don't have the right to do it, but believe it, the way it's written, they can fire generals and admirals serve at the discretion of the Secretary of Defense, and so he can get rid of them. I do think it's sending the wrong signal when you get rid of almost all your senior female admirals, in leadership positions, in 3 and 4 star positions. He got rid of a good chunk of them, including the chief of naval operations, without really giving a reason, or in my mind, and by rumor, talking with her to kind of get a vision. Okay, are we on the same track or not? It was, you're gone. And you can't help but notice that in his book that he wrote in 2024, not like 2015, he said, she's not qualified to be head of the Navy. A judgment he is not qualified to make at that point as a Fox News commentator. Not make in a legitimate way. And he has said things like, or written things like, we don't need mommies in combat. We don't need mommies in the military. I mean, those are not helpful comments. We have a gender integrated military now, and in many positions, like the part of the Navy I come from, surface warfare, women are 35% of the officer intake. What's he going to do? Like, go back in time and recruit different people to the Naval Academy and West Point and our Air Force Academy? Same. Our aviation squadrons are probably about 20% female in intake. Submarines are less because we have issues with RACs there, and SEALs are 0. But we're really dependent on, in combat. These are combat arms units. We need these women, and so his yicky yak about this is completely unhelpful, and it undermines the chain of command for those women who are left behind. He's not going around firing lieutenant commanders and commanders, but they have subordinates who listen to him talk or read his book. Not helpful. So that's my opinion. I do share that. That is partisan. Only because Lloyd Austin never said that. If he said that, I would have attacked Lloyd Austin for saying it, but never heard Lloyd Austin take action like that or say it. So it's not really partisan. It's anti-Hegseth, which I'm happy, and I'm comfortable with that. And I'm sure he thinks I'm an idiot, and that's okay.
A lot of this war is being fought in the public domain. We're getting a lot of takes. Some that are very, again, it's awesome because we've got retired officers and folks that are in some of these oil and gas industries able to share their expert opinions that, 20 years ago, we maybe wouldn't have been able to tap into. But with that comes a lot of misunderstanding and things being framed maybe incorrectly. In your opinion, what is something that people often misunderstand about this conflict when trying to figure out the direction it's going?
Well, look, this is challenging because I'm not sure we've laid out the strategic objective properly. I think because the president, we mentioned several strategic objectives, and I think in the very beginning when we were killing a lot of the Israelis, I think we're killing a lot of the senior leadership. I think we intonated this is about regime change. I think what the people are missing is it's probably not regime change. It's much more likely that this is about the ability to change how the regime acts, how it treats its Arab neighbors, how it treats Israel, its ability to execute long-range ballistic missile strikes, short-range ballistic missile and drone strikes against the Arab countries. We are definitely changing how the regime can act. And I don't think the American people see that that's a pretty significant thing, particularly when you also remember that this is a regime that only 2 months ago killed 32,000 people in 36 hours, right? And so changing how the regime acts is important. So that's what I think we're kind of missing, that was a major strategic objective. We can still achieve it if we get the nuclear program to 0 in the negotiations and open the Straits of Hormuz, if the president's successful at the diplomatic table and leverages his military success to do that. We'll come out of that. And then I hope we can do a better job explaining to people what the strategic objective was, but we did not do a good job.
I think that's fair. The messaging right out the gate was confusing. It seems like it dialed in over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been debates about is it regime change or not. Yeah.
The more Dan Kane talked, General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the more we understood what this strategic objective. Now, look, that's not his job. His job is actually, he and Brad Cooper are the operational objectives. But Kane sitting, they're doing these kind of dual-headed press conferences. I think he did an okay job, kind of at least from his perch, explaining a strategic objective. So we did come around to that, but I don't think we were smooth on this. I don't, the president didn't do one of those things where, he gets on the national TV and says, last night at 4:00 in the morning, I initiated combat operations against Iran with our partner Israel. We struck 800 targets. We are going to do this until the regime changes its behavior, or until we have removed the ability of the regime to negatively impact its neighbors. That was never said. And I think the implication, it might have been the press that did it, but the implication became regime change. But quick, by the way, when you kill like 16 of the 20 most senior people in one strike, you're kind of implying you might be interested in regime change.
That's probably how they viewed it in Iran, which is something.
100%. Now, look, you and I have been involved in the military for a long time. And in our times in the military, in 2011, we did an attack on Libya, an air-based attack. But there were 50,000 armed insurgents on the ground, crazy former army, Libyan army people, and they were successful. I mean, long-term, Libya wasn't successful, but in the short term, they were successful in overthrowing the regime. In my time, I go back to 1999, we ran an air campaign with the Kosovar Liberation Army on the ground, over 100,000 armed troops. They were successful, and they still are in Kosovo. Those times, air campaigns got regime change because you had armed insurgencies on the ground. I would get back to the one thing that really surprised me. I thought, like on day 2 or 3, we'd find out that the Israelis had armed a whole bunch of Iranian, insurgents, who were going to overthrow the IRGC, and I was incorrect in that assumption. And that did not happen. It has not happened, and I don't think it will happen now.
I would agree. That would have been talk about changing things up a little bit. You mentioned, and we'll wrap up here in a second. You mentioned Admiral Cooper and General Kane. They're awesome. And a benefit of all of this is, I think, getting them exposed to the general public so people get to see what that professionalism looks like. Because when they're asked questions, they answer the question. And if they can't, they say they can't, and they move it to somebody who can. And it's great. Every time they're on camera, I think they just do such a good job representing the military.
I think both of them do. General Kane's is a really interesting case. I think if a whole bunch of us had sat down and written down the 1,000 people most likely to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the first Trump administration, Dan Kane may not have made the list. But holy crap, has he delivered. I mean, he has done fantastic. He balances the president well. He balances Secretary Hegseth well. I think he has that right personality to lead. So, at least by external, I mean, I'm not inside the joint staff, stirring the pot or anything, but I'll tell you, I'm impressed. And Brad Cooper's always been an impressive officer, and he was groomed for this job. He was Fifth Fleet, the maritime fleet in the Middle East, and he was Deputy Central Command Commander. I mean, you could not have had a better preparation for the job he's in, and I think he's handled it really well. And it's not a traditional Navy job, but we did kind of get into an a different kind of Middle East war. So it was kind of nice to have, either an Air Force general or a Navy admiral doing this. Not a requirement, by the way, in our joint force. There's a lot of Army generals like C.D. O'Donoghue, I know who could have executed this, or General Kurilla, his predecessor, could have executed this campaign just as well. But you're right. He handles himself in the press really well. He has the right temperament. And he can patiently listen to the same question asked 8 or 9 times and still be polite and professional in his response. Not a skill set I have. And I think he compliments General Kane very well. And they both compliment Secretary Hegseth because he's a little fiery and off axis and often not answering the question asked. So, yeah, I think we're very fortunate collectively as a country to have men like Kane and Cooper.
Well, it's every single day. We're kind of waiting to see what the next statement is. But now from you, Admiral Montgomery, I've got the 2-week stint. You didn't say it, but mid-May. I'm not going to attribute 2 weeks to you. I'll say mid-May.
Not the 15th. I mean, like the 18th, 19th. You can't
okay,
like
3 weeks.
Flight back from China, say order, release the hounds, right? You know what I mean? You gotta land. Both of you get your like press statements out about what a wonderful trip it was. The photos have to be released. Then You call General
Okay.
Kane
All right.
and you say, release the hounds.
3 weeks it is then.
All right.
Well, Admiral Montgomery, thank you so much for taking the time, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Preston.
All right, so thank you so much to Admiral Montgomery for taking the time to walk through all that today. I think it's always just so valuable to get the insights from a subject matter expert like that. And I know he's busy. He's bouncing all around the world, news appearances left, right, and center. So to take the time out of his busy schedule to talk to us means an awful lot. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.